We've got a couple of things that we need to do tonight. I'd like to introduce Mr. Jeff Salters, who's going to introduce a guest of ours for our procurement audit update.
Thank you, Dr. Little, members of the board. I'm going to introduce to you again this evening Matthew Hodges with Burkett & Burkett CPAs. Mary Beth, I've got the remote up here. And Matthew's going to talk to us this evening about a couple things. The finalization of our CAFR, Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, and then also our procurement audit, which we do every 3 years. So, Matthew, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, members of the board, for your time this evening. Again, we'll cover the financial audit first. We have completed our audits, the financial and compliance audits for the district for the CAFR. We did, as I mentioned last month, need to perform some additional procedures related to an addendum to the OMB compliance supplement related to COVID-19 funding that the district received and spent in fiscal year 2020. And there were no changes to the draft CAFR that we presented last month as a result of the testing that we performed. And so you do have 3 clean opinions, as I mentioned last month. We did make one correction to note 1 per recommendation to better reflect the relationship of the district and the foundation in the process of board nominations. So our procurement examination covered the period from July 1, 2017 through June 30th, 2020. State law does require that you audit every 3 years the district's compliance with its procurement code. We followed the South Carolina State Fiscal Accountability Authority's questionnaire. The title of the document is School District Procurement Audit Procedures in performing our procurement audit. We performed sampling. First of all, a 2-month sample of P-card purchases for each fiscal year. We inspected 2 months. It was January and March of 2018, 2019, and 2020, and looking at a sample of those purchases. We also looked at a block sample of 200 numerical purchase orders for each fiscal year, looking for items like splitting of orders and favored vendors. We looked at 15 disposals and sales of surplus property. That included 5 from each of the 3 fiscal years, as well as a total of 73 procurement transactions. And you can see the breakdown there by year. That does cover each of the strata that's listed in the procurement code, as well as an overall population sample. Additionally, we sampled 5 procurements that relate to major construction, as well as any related change orders. And we reviewed 100% of the sole source and emergency procurement documentation from July 1, 2017 through June 30th of 2020, as well as unauthorized procurements during that same time period. We did have one finding in our examination that was related to a number of procurements that were not appropriately ratified by the CFO during fiscal year 2018 and 19. And just to provide a little bit of additional information, I want to cover the district's unauthorized procurement policy under your procurement guidelines that states that the school principal or department head will be notified in writing of any procurement that appears to be unauthorized. The unauthorized form PO10 must be completed and signed by the individual responsible for the procurement and their supervisor. The facts and circumstances portion of the form must be completed by the individual responsible for the procurement. The supervisor must complete the disciplinary actions and corrective actions of the form. Once the form is complete and signed, forward the form to the procurement department. The procurement department staff will review the form for completeness. If complete, the form will be forwarded to the chief financial officer for ratification. And once the procurement is ratified, a copy of the ratification will be forwarded to the principal or department head. So it's the kind of second to last step there of it being ratified by the CFO that was not completed. That was prior to that CFO's retirement as of June 30th of 2019. In the report, I'll read the district's response to the finding, stating that the previous CFO retired on June 30th, 2019, and was unable to ratify the procurements prior to his retirement. The CFO was replaced by the Chief Operations Officer in the fiscal year 2019-20. Ratifications are current. Furthermore, the district has put a procedure in place that in the event that the chief operations officer is unable to complete the ratification within 30 days of receipt of the facts and circumstances surrounding the act and corrective actions, the ratifications of the acts will be assigned to the superintendent. So this finding under that new procedure should not occur again. You've got that safeguard in place. Okay? So at this time, I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Was the dollar amount of those procurements that were not signed off on the CFO consistent with previous fiscal years? The number of unauthorized procurements or unplanned procurements? Or
So we covered 3 fiscal years. We didn't perform the prior 3-year audit, so I can't
Okay.
answer that because we weren't involved in that prior 3-year audit. That was another firm.
But the volume or size of those procurements
It didn't jump out to us, no, it wasn't unreasonable.
This might be a question for Mr. Salters, Mr. Hodges. So what are the reasons why an unauthorized procurement might occur?
I can speak to that, and you can
Okay,
correct
Mr.
me if
Hodges.
I'm wrong. This is actually from the district's procurement guidelines for unauthorized procurement. Some examples might be artificially dividing supplies or services to avoid the competitive procurement process, items added to a purchase order without an approved change order form, authorizing a vendor to ship or deliver supplies and services prior to receiving a properly executed and signed purchase order, signing a contract or agreement with legally binding terms and conditions without the authority to enter into a contract. So that's a few examples, and I don't know if there's more common ones you'd like to mention.
Those are the most common ones that we see, and you know, we can talk more about that, but probably one of the most common is receiving goods before a purchase order has been entered. There may be various circumstances around that occur from time to time, but that does happen.
So it's more procedural than a disallowed purchase.
Typically, it is a procedural thing. Another thing that comes up is we have discounts in place with certain, local businesses, and if a person goes to that local business and does not present the discount card, as an example, and don't receive the discount, then that's an unauthorized procurement. So it's really a procedural issue that they run into typically. It's pretty rare that you find circumstances where there's an intentional split or someone's trying to intentionally split a purchase order. I want to buy 100 widgets, and I'm going to buy 50 this week and 50 next week from the same vendor to get under the limits. Our procurement staff is very good at protecting us from those types of transactions. So folks at the schools know not to do that.
And then the principal has to write a letter saying what actions have been taken and what will be done in the future, not to let that happen.
That's correct. There's a form that the principal or the supervisor fills out and counsels with the employee that's involved in the process, and then that form is then sent up to procurement and reviewed for completeness, and then forwarded on to the CFO. And at that point, the CFO signs the document to ratify it.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Yes,
form.
sir. I'm sure you are.
And I guess as a percent of our budget, this dollar amount is, obviously less than 1% typically.
It's very small.
Yeah.
And you guys, I know you know this, but you receive a report each month in your, your board packet. It looks like this. It's unauthorized procurements. And so, there, as an example, in July, we had 953 purchase orders and we had 12 unauthorized. December, 639 POs and 9 unauthorized. So it's a very small percentage.
Does that only apply to operational budget? Do the same codes or same oversight apply to, say, an individual school's budget?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
All
all transactions
all
are
general
reviewed.
fund expenditures, yes. Anything governed by the procurement code.
So, Mr. Salters, you could probably best answer this. When it says the CFO retired and was unable to ratify prior to his retirement, why was that?
I can't speak to that, Ms. Garris. The signatures were not put on the forms prior to his retirement.
Okay. Let's see here. Mr. Hodges, you might can answer this. Is there a quarterly or annually reporting, some kind of report that the district must submit unauthorized procurement reports to that PO 10 that you were talking about? Does that go to another state agency such as the Division of Procurement Services? Or does all of that stay in-house?
I'm not sure.
It all stays in-house, yeah. And we submit a report to the board each month, and as I mentioned, it shows the unauthorized procurements that's in your board packet.
Okay, what I'm trying to get at is, so that went on for a couple of years. Well, at least we know 2 years that are just part of this audit. Whose job would it be to follow up and ensure the district is in compliance?
And so typically it would be the CFO's job to do that. And so if the CFO, and in this case, if the CFO, we've put a procedure in place so that if the CFO is not doing that, now the superintendent will be made aware of that process, and the superintendent will be able to follow up. Previously, it basically landed at the CFO's desk and it stopped there. And so, to your point, there was no one informed about whether or not that was happening. And so now the process is in place that the superintendent will be made aware of it, and those documents will be ratified at the superintendent level, and then the superintendent can have a conversation with the COO or acting CFO and say, what are you doing? Why isn't this happening? So it should not happen again. And it has not been a finding previously. So just to your point, it wasn't an ongoing thing. It occurred on those 2 years.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hodges, once this audit is complete, are copies of all of this information gathered somewhere? Like, is there a big book that y'all make copies of this and hang on to it, or do y'all just?
So we provide a copy to the district provides it to the State Fiscal Accountability Authority, so they have it. I'm not sure what their retention policy is. On our end, we retain our work papers for a period of 7 years.
Okay, so just say we wanted to see, this is just on the same page. So we selected and tested change orders from contraction projects selected for testing. I think that's supposed to be construction. So you would have a copy of those, and that's what you're saying you submit to the procurement office?
Oh, no, we only submit a copy of this report
Okay, that's what I'm
to the
asking.
State Fiscal Accountability. Our work papers, we retain as confidential information. We retain it for 7 years.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Hodges? Thank you so much.
Madam Chair, I would just like to recognize Tracy Lucas and John Stevens here, directors of our procurement office, and all the hard work that they do every day to ensure that our procurement code is followed to the letter, and training and working with our schools. We have a tremendous amount of work and effort that goes into making sure that we're following the letter of the law. And I can't tell you, those are the two finest people I know in the procurement industry, if you will. And really pleased to have them working for the district.
Thank you, Mr. Salters. Thank you all for all that you do for our district. Dr. Little?
Okay. I had another question for Mr. Hodges. He saw me raising my hand. On the second slide, you had mentioned that you made a note to better reflect the relationship of the district. I'm guessing that's with the Educational Foundation.
That's correct.
Right. So what are the details of that?
So that was included in the updated comprehensive annual financial report. You had made a mention last month that there was a correction needed to reflect the fact that it's not, the foundation board members are not nominated by the district board. So we've removed that verbiage and reflected the fact that it's 3 members of the district's board are on the foundation's board. And so there's a couple of just minor wording updates in that note disclosure.
Okay.
Ms. Garris, we'll get you a copy of that,
Okay.
and all the board as well.
Okay. Thank you.